Sorry we left you in the waiting room a bit. We were just trying to get all of our details figured out. And we know we don't want to start any sooner than most people can join us. So didn't want there to be too many minutes of awkward silence. Something that's really useful for other attendees and us, the speakers, is if you have the ability and are willing to, in addition to your name, if you're willing to put who you're affiliated with. And if you're just here watching for interest, but usually some of you are involved with a community group, you're a producer group, you're with a center, you're with the university, but if you'd be willing to add to your name where in the food system you work in or are interested in, then when you ask us questions later or for us to just peruse, we can kind of see who's in our audience and have a little bit of context about who's viewing today. So if you want to go ahead and change your name to include some additional information, that would be great. We'll be starting soon, but we do want to give people a couple of minutes to stream in. So we'll be starting perhaps in like 2 minutes. And so just hold tight. But welcome to the webinar. And welcome to the webinar. We'll start shortly. We're just waiting for people are kind of streaming in at a good pace, so we don't want to start sooner than we have most of who's joining us, but we're super glad to have you guys joining us today. I think some of you are old friends from when we were doing a more active webinar series with this COVID project. And we kind of think of this today as our grand finale because it'll probably be the last one we do, but it's always great to see some old faces who joined us for many of those over the last 4 years, but also some new folks who found this webinar as well. And Mackenzie, whenever you want to, you can slide share so we can get going here in a couple minutes.
Sorry about that. Zoom crashed like 3 times on me trying to get over here.
Hi, Samantha. Yeah, Samantha's our co-host from the USDA Today Ag Marketing Service, and we were getting nervous because her tech wasn't working and we wanted her to be part of the hosting committee today. So I do think we've got a pretty good set of folks here that have signed up. So we're going to go ahead and get started for today. Mackenzie, do you have the slides or do you need me to share those?
Yep, I've got let me loading them in now.
So today we are really excited to share yet another update of the work we were allowed to partner with the USDA Ag Marketing Service on to explore some of the market dynamics that happened as a result of COVID. And this is a project we started way back in 2020. And again, we've seen a lot of you all at past webinars starting in 2020. This is the third phase of that, and it'll probably be our last webinar, so it's our grand hurrah. But we're thrilled that in addition to seeing some familiar faces from past webinars, there's lots of you new folks signed up today as well. This is material that, in addition to being presented today, will also be this recording of this webinar will be posted on our website, and then a series of about 6 to 8 small consumer food insight fact sheets developed from these same graphs and tables and findings will be posted over the next 2 months on our website, which we'll put the link to that website in the chat box. And so this is also a really good time for you because if someone asks a super clever question today we hadn't thought about, we're still even in a position we could actually slice and dice the data fairly well to present it to you. So that's a long-winded introduction and welcome to you to this, what we expect to be our last webinar on local and regional food systems response to COVID, looking specifically at consumer behavior over this time. And although you'll see, again, some familiar faces, including my co-host from USDA Ag Marketing Service, we've continued to evolve as a team as well, as some new young talent has come alongside us to work on this project. So with that, I'd also, next slide, would like to have Samantha give you a little more insights into why they did approach some of us partners to do this project and how the project has evolved over the last few years. The last thing I will say before I step aside for a second is we welcome you here. Anyone who wants to share anything in the chat box, please do. If you want to change your name so we know your affiliation, that's super helpful if you ask questions. We do plan to go through the presentation in its fullness before we take questions and answers at the end, because there's some people who can only stay an hour today. But if you ask questions in the chat box that are easy to type answers to, we'll answer them as we go, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But if you have questions in the meantime for clarification, all of us who aren't speaking can sit and answer those as well. So that's kind of how we're going to keep the process running today. With that, I'll turn it over to Samantha to tell you a little bit more about the motivation for this project, and then we'll move on to some of the findings for today. But again, welcome.
Hi, yes, welcome. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Do you want to go back a slide really quickly, Mackenzie? Yeah. We're really excited to be doing kind of this consumer survey 3.0 webinar for you. I just want to kind of bring it back to the origins of this project in general. So multiple, seems like decades ago, when the pandemic hit is where we started kind of this initial work. Really trying to understand the impacts of COVID-19 on the local and regional food system, with an understanding that the federal government doesn't move quite as quickly as some other organizations. So while we were still trying to figure out the best way to do things, a lot of work was already being done by national organizations and universities and people who were out with the stakeholders trying to make things work, because well, people needed to be fed that week. People were trying to keep their businesses open. And so we entered into this project knowing that maybe we could be this conduit or this coordinator to bring together a network. But what we really wanted to do was elevate the work that was already being done in the field by these stakeholder groups. So we brought together 17 different organizations to build a community of practice, and partnered with 2 university partners, University of Kentucky and Colorado State University, to really kind of come together, figure out some cross-sector collaborations and learnings. We did really cool resource hub, some innovation briefs, some sector snapshots where we did listening sessions with restaurateurs or food hub operators or farmer market managers, really just trying to understand what these impacts were. And as part of that, we kind of we learned so much from the first iteration that we wanted to keep it moving and kind of have this understanding of, outside of the pandemic, local regional food systems as a point of recovery and resilience. So that's kind of where we pivoted into this 2.0 and have continued on with that. I think some of you were at the Resiliency Playbook webinar, but that's also up on the website now, and I can put it into the chat. But really trying to make this into something of like, phase 1 was almost research and collection, and phase 2 being how do we capture all of these learnings, all of these tools, and put them into something that's usable by the stakeholders. And so that's kind of the phase that we're in now. And for this webinar, we're going to focus on the consumer food insights, or the consumer survey that we've conducted. You can go to the next slide here, Mackenzie. But as you saw in the title, this is 3.0, which means there was a 1.0 and a 2.0. So in the chat, I put the consumer food insights for 1.0 and 2.0 that you can look at. But it's been really interesting to see the evolution of this survey over time, and how the impact of COVID-19, and then also just in general on different market channels. And so that's really what we're going to go into today. I think, Brittany, you're taking over from here. You want to introduce yourself and talk about the key themes?
I think
I'll do these, and then
you'll
I'll
do
hand
the
to Brittany.
okay.
And what it also asks people to do is, as you're speaking and you're doing your part of the webinar, give an introduction to who you are and who you're affiliated with. We have a great team here today, including some young talent that's just joined the project this time. So I'm Dawn Thomney. I'm from Colorado State University in our Department of Ag and Resource Economics. And now I'm really fortunate to get to run one of the new USDA food business centers. But before taking that role, I was active with this project, and we were helped frame some of the key themes. But really, this didn't come from academia. USDA was smart enough to have us coalesce about 16 to 18 industry groups involved in local and regional food systems in focus groups right at the start of the outbreak in 2020. And it was they who told us what they needed to know, what they were curious about, what they were seeing on the ground, and if we could use a national level survey to substantiate the trends they were seeing at the time. And as you might guess, very curious about if these trends were going to persist, because you don't want to make long-term planning decisions based on what are going to be flash trends that go away after COVID. So the whole 3 phases of these surveys have really been driven by industry questions, including ones that have come from these webinars, but specifically how COVID disruptions have affected consumer behavior, particularly in local and regional food system sectors, and the use of market channels. So we're perhaps one of the surveys out there that has done the most detailed work on specific market channels, and you'll see that makes some of our graphics super complicated because we try to cover so much detail. And then we've broken it down a bit because not all households reacted the same. Not all community sizes reacted the same. We really saw a huge shift to online. We've seen, unfortunately, a lot of issues with food security being top of mind with a lot of households. So all of those themes will be touched on at least lightly today. And again, within the next 2 months in that Consumer Food Insight series that Samantha already shared with you, we will have at least one Consumer Food Insight fact sheet, something like a 2 to 4 page publication, where there'll be what you see today, but also some additional context, perhaps even spurred by some of your questions. Next. So for what you're seeing for today, we'll be focusing entirely on Survey 3.0 findings. In a couple places, we'll be doing some comparisons with previous findings, but really to get the richest picture, you can go look at the Consumer Food Insights from all of them. Because if we try to present all this today, your head would probably spin. But you'll see we strategically put these surveys at 3 different points in time, because we did know there was an evolution of how consumers were thinking about things. So even though today we really talk about what's happened in the last year or so, we do ask consumers to recall how their broader perspective of how they changed their behavior has changed over the whole 4-year period. Next slide. So we thought it also would be interesting for you all to see, for 2 reasons, where our results came from. It is a national survey, but because it's a national survey, parts of the country that have less dense population perhaps aren't represented as fully here. But Jairus, who you'll be hearing from later, had the clever idea to make sure we might be able to disentangle how some of you who are working in more rural areas versus big city areas versus suburban areas might see this playing out differently. So we did have big enough samples from different types of communities. Here we define as size and their level of rurality, that you'll be seeing some of our results sliced and diced that way. But this is generally who we have responses from in general. Next slide. And with that, that's one set of demographics, but I'm going to turn it over to Brittany to talk more broadly about the representativeness of our sample and who we heard from, so that you know a little more context about the results you're going to see and who is responding to our survey. So Brittany, please introduce yourself and I'll let you take over here.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm Brittany Eccles. I'm an agricultural marketing specialist with USDA AMS. I'm also a first-year PhD student in the Department of Agricultural Resources and Economics at Colorado State University. So back to this survey. This survey was a national survey, as you could see, and it included 4,600 households. 51% of respondents identified as women and 49% as men. And this is consistent with U.S. Census data on demographics. The income distribution reported in the survey was also consistent with U.S. Census data. And the average household size was 2.67 people, and 25% of households reported having a child under the age of 18 at home. Next slide, Mackenzie. So 80% of respondents were white, about 12% were Black or African American, 2.8% were Asian, and 2.5% identified as multiple races. The next figure on the right shows the further details on racial demographics. Next slide, Mackenzie. Respondents were also asked whether they are Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish in origin. Approximately 90% of respondents indicated they were not of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. About 10% of respondents said yes, and less than 1% preferred not to answer. The pie chart on the right shows that of the respondents who indicated they were of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, the majority or 6% identified as Mexican or primarily Mexican. 1.9% were Puerto Rican, and 1.6% were other Hispanic, and then you can see about 0.7% were Cuban. Next slide, please. The pandemic had wide-ranging effects on households, which included impacts on financial stability and other health, among other things. Respondents were asked, have you or anyone in your household experienced a change in income or job since the COVID-19 outbreak? And while 62% said no changes, 38% of respondents did experience change in household income or jobs since the COVID-19 pandemic. About 13% of respondents saw reduced hours or income at their job, and 2.5% indicated that they were furloughed. Respondents were also asked about their household's exposure to COVID-19, and 46% said they didn't have COVID, 21% had COVID, and 15% didn't know. And we also saw 13% indicated they probably didn't have COVID, 3% probably did have COVID, and a little under 1% preferred not to answer that question. So now I'll turn it back over to Dr. Thomany.
Thank you. And although we're not going to focus on those particular questions as much today, in our past Consumer Food Insights, which Samantha shared the link for, we did show that some of the behaviors that happen in the more active COVID period of 2020 to 2021 was significantly influenced by whether people had those disruptions to their household. We have not yet with this data disentangled that, but if that's something of interest to folks, this is a good time to bring that up today. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we structured the survey to be as informative as possible to that very diverse set of industry and market stakeholders that USDA had us do focus groups with. And one thing we did is we obviously disentangled food at home and food away from home, because as we all know, the most immediate disruption was people not being able to go out to eat at the level they had been. I don't know if people are aware, but about 50% of our food dollars get spent away from home. So that those markets closing down was a huge disruption. And we did have restaurant partners as part of our project. But in addition, because we knew food security was going to be an issue, and the USDA was doing some pretty innovative food assistance programming as well, we also have asked some questions about food acquisition, and we'll talk about those a little bit when we talk about food security later. And again, in past Consumer Food Insight series, you can go read about differences we found there. So we just wanted that to be top of mind to you, because you're going to start seeing a lot of detail about market channels as we proceed. Next slide. So the first thing we really have asked consistently across the time periods is, were people trying new markets? And it has been pretty consistent that somewhere between a quarter and a third of consumers continue to actually kind of go out there and try new markets. At first, we were attributing that all to COVID and the disruptions that were causing people to have to find new places to buy food if they were seeing empty shelves. Now we're kind of keeping that question alive just because we're seeing just general changes in behavior, so we're trying to track that for the sector. So you'll see here that there's still a bunch of people who are sticking with their usual and whatever markets they were using, but consistently, again, over the 3 surveys, we've seen a pretty significant share of people trying new markets, and specifically ones that are very important to local and regional food systems, whether directly like a CSA, farmers market, or direct from producer. But we also know that the increased use of these local independent restaurants and specialty food markets and food box programs very commonly also align with local and regional food markets as well. So we're excited to continue to see people stepping out of their comfort zone and trying these new markets, because that tends to fare well for local and regional farms, ranches, and seafood businesses. Next slide. So when we asked people how they found the new market channel that they did, I did my best to do a word cloud for an economist, but you'll see really common themes here. And what we really want to emphasize here is that, with the exception of maybe social media and advertising popping up here a little bit, this is really a word of mouth marketing system. And I think this is not going to surprise any of you on the call who work in local and regional food markets. What we found is everybody who is trying new things, for the most part, were being told by people to try the new things. So our first recommendation here is anything you can do within the markets you work with to accelerate the sharing of that word of mouth, making it easier for people to share word of mouth. Social media also does work, as you see online and social media big. This is where you should be spending time and resources. Paid advertising does not look like it resonates in these markets. And so this is, I think, the first message for you all, is that is a game everybody should be stepping up, because it continues to be the key driver in food markets for people trying new places. Next slide. And now I'm going to step back from the survey, because we decided we really needed to clarify something. You're going to see in some slides that it feels like everybody's spending more money everywhere on every market and everything. Well, that gets curious to someone like me who's an economist. So I dug a little deeper into some broader USDA Economic Research Service data, and it turns out Americans have shifted around food. We knew, and you can see it in that gray bar near 2019, that we lost a lot of sales to food away from home. And that's where we saw a lot of these markets get new activity, because people had to buy more food to cook at home. What's been interesting is we've seen a full recovery of food away from home. Restaurants are back to getting the exact same consumer dollars they were getting. And at the same time, we didn't lose that same amount for food at home purchases. So that's a long-winded way of saying US households have decided to spend more of their budget, even adjusting for inflation. Americans are spending more money on food. They have decided food is a higher priority in their budget allocation. And this is somewhat problematic for food security issues, and we'll talk about those later. But even at the high end, people have actually shifted to say, I'm going to spend more on food. So this isn't a zero-sum game for food markets anymore. We can have everybody in food markets kind of being a winner right now, because Americans have actually made a values statement in the fact they're saying, I'm going to spend more of my household budget on food going forward, it looks like. And that has persisted into the latest time we had data, which is 2022. So this is something to be thinking about as we present these results, is that this is not a zero-sum game where food markets are stealing from each other. People are actually just spending more in these categories. Next slide. Sorry to geek out on you a little bit there as an economist, but it's important, because as we go into the next slides and you say, how can everybody be spending more everywhere all at once? It's because there is seeming to be a net win for food markets. And with more detail on that, I'm now going to turn it over to Jairus to talk about how that looks like across markets and across communities.
All right, thanks, Dawn. I'm Jairus Rossi. I'm an associate research professor at University of Kentucky in Ag Econ. And this first slide here, it pretty much reiterates everything that Dawn had just said about it not being a zero-sum game. So what we have here are results from the past 3 surveys. So not just the most recent, but the 2 iterations we did before. And what I did was I looked at expenditures, just the total amount of expenditures at different market channels where you might find local foods. And I adjusted for inflation. So these are all in to the current dollars, or dollars as of 2023 in the fall. And so what I did, we had, I forget how many total market channels we looked at, but this is a subset of ones that only might deal with local foods. And I aggregated a few of those just to make it easier to read. But what we have here is we've got, so supermarkets, this is kind of the baseline. Everyone goes to supermarkets, not necessarily local foods, but sometimes there are. But something like specialty retail, this includes small format grocery stores, health food stores, co-ops, and specialty markets like bakeries and delis. And then direct markets right there, that includes things like CSA, farmers markets and purchasing directly from a farmer. And then we've got our local and independent restaurants. And so I think the biggest takeaway here is that, people, there is more, there has been some recovery in the restaurant sector over time, but a lot of people, most of where people are spending money, at least on local food, is at retail outlets. So we've got now, we saw a lot of experimentation right after COVID with people going to new businesses at different market channels, and we see that in every survey we've done since then. And so things like the specialty or local retailers, every year there's been an increase except for a small dip in 2022. So since the beginning of the pandemic, people are spending more at these specialty retailers. And we see the same thing with local restaurants compared to the beginning of COVID, especially after you see that small dip there at the beginning of COVID. Direct markets, now there's a slight increase from the start of COVID with some variation. And I think the timing of the survey kind of depresses the numbers a bit because we did do these surveys in September and October. So, given that a lot of farm fresh foods are seasonal, this is kind of at the end of the growing season. So we may actually, the overall amount of spending might actually be higher. One thing that jumps out just a little bit is there's a drop across all market channels in 2022. At least for direct markets, this is something we've seen. I do a lot of work with CSA, and we saw a lot of huge demand jump across the country, 2020, 2021. And then in 2022, there was a bit of a drop off, and we're seeing some flattening of demand for at least CSA. And so it may be that that's what we're kind of seeing here, where 2021 was the high point for a lot of these market channels, except for supermarkets. And then there's been a bit of a decline, but it's maybe stabilizing at a higher level of spending than it was prior to COVID. All right, next slide, please. And so here, this is the percentage of change in each of the surveys that we did. And so as Don mentioned before, in each survey, we asked respondents to compare their weekly spending in the previous month that they, of when they took the survey, compared to, and then they had to answer another question that was, how much spending did you do in the previous fall in the same month? So we're taking the amount of expenditures from the previous year and comparing it to the most recent year, and then calculating the percentage of change in spending at that market channel. So again, biggest takeaway is that consumers are spending more at local market channels generally since the beginning of COVID. You see the, farmers markets and local restaurants, this isn't a surprise, right? There's initially that red bar, that's the first, that's comparing 2020 to 2019. So there was a large hit in terms of spending in those places. And that was probably likely due to closures, delays in opening, or, heightened safety measures required at those venues for operation. And so, we've seen a bit more of a recovery or an increase in spending at farmers market more recently, but the local restaurants, you see that, again, this might tell the story that there is some recovery in that sector. Now, direct purchases from farmers really only started increasing in the past year. And to me, that's a bit curious because it goes against the initial observations we did in this project, where people were buying a lot more from farmers at the start of COVID. So these data consider everybody's responses that took the survey. So, the people that are buying directly from farmers are probably buying a lot more here and there, and that might not be reflected by, the 66% of the people that aren't experimenting with new markets. But anyway, the food box observation here is quite interesting. Now, it should be noted that this does not include CSA. This is more of a multi-farm or aggregated food box from a food hub or a box, just any kind of box product that's not like a single farm CSA. But right after COVID, that market channel spending jumped a lot. And then right in the second year of COVID, it dropped a little bit. But then more recently, again, people are spending more on these box products. So I'd be curious to know what the actual reasons were, but I'm guessing that it might, at least that first jump had something to do with food box programming and its connection to food relief. And then again, we see all retail markets people are buying more from retail, whether that was conventional retail, health food stores, small format groceries, specialty markets, and so on. So people, are preferring to get local foods from retail markets more generally. Right, next slide, please. So this is the same, these three graphs, they're the same as what I just showed you, but broken down by community size. And so, again, you can see a similar pattern with restaurants and farmers markets where there's an initial decrease in both of those, but the biggest increases, at least in farmers markets, have been seen in more rural or non-metro locations. So, after the start of the COVID, there was a bit of a drop in these market channels, but at least more recently, farmers market have become more significant part of what people are doing in rural places. Same thing, well, not quite the same thing, but in the buying directly from a farmer, we saw that the strongest and most consistent increases in smaller metro communities, though recent increases in the non-metro or rural areas is kind of compelling. I'd be curious to know if it's been investments in infrastructure or, there's been a lot of programs to try to make the supply chain work at a lot of different scales. So that may be one of the explanations for that one. And then food box spending, again, this increased at the start of the pandemic in all community sizes. But both metro size classes, so the small and large metro, had decreases in the second year of the pandemic. So I don't know if that reflects decreased funding for food relief in the form of food boxes in those locations. But in the most recent survey, people have come back to that market channel more. And I'm not sure what the case is. And we might have some experts here in this webinar that know the answer, and be interesting to have a discussion about that. But it is worth noting that in rural areas, food box spending increased every year. So that remained a significant part of what people were doing in smaller locations. And then again, finally, and this coheres with what we've seen so far, retail spending has consistently increased regardless of what type of retail operation. So supermarkets, health food stores, small format, and specialty retail. Thank you. I'm not sure who's next.
Thanks, Jairus, and Mackenzie, will let you take over and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Really interesting, Jairus. Thanks for that. My name is Mackenzie, and I am a PhD candidate at the Department of Ag and Resource Economics in Colorado State University. And today, first, I'm going to be talking about online food shopping trends that have occurred in the last year and as they compare to what we saw during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, a really interesting shift that happened was this shift towards online food shopping. And you can see in this chart going from 2019 to 2020, the red line shows the percent change in e-commerce sales. And we see this increase of 54% after the onset of the pandemic. And this increasing in e-commerce sales trend continued to occur even beyond the onset of the pandemic and into this sort of new normal post-pandemic food environment. And we expect to see that eventually online grocery sales will account for 20% of total grocery sales. So it's really substantial. In the latest data in 2024, this blue line shows online grocery sales as a percent of total sales, and it was almost 14% already in 2024. And what we know about these shoppers who are using online food shopping options are that they actually still prefer to shop in their local store compared to an online alternative. So this is some preliminary evidence that online food shopping may not be a substitute for in-person food shopping, but rather a complement and a tool for time saving. And so some further evidence for that might be that for those who do shop online, 68% do so in addition to their in-store shopping. And of those who are shopping online, 75% of their expenditures are made in the store. So more research is needed to fully understand this relationship between online and in-person food shopping, but that is some interesting evidence that it might be a complement. So we were interested in this, and we asked our respondents how many of them feel like they're spending a higher share of their budget on online food shopping. And we discerned between curbside pickup shopping and delivery shopping. And so this big blue chunk is just those respondents that are not spending a higher share of their budget on online food purchases than they were before the pandemic occurred. Sorry, that's an important context. This is comparing to before the pandemic. And so this colorful chunk, the non-blue chunk, is the respondents who do feel like they're spending a higher share of their budget share on either curbside pickup or delivery. And so we see that 11% felt like they were spending more on curbside pickup only, 7% felt like they were spending more on delivery only, and 4% felt like they were spending more on both curbside pickup and delivery. And so for this chunk, this non-blue chunk of consumers who said that they are the heavier spenders of online food shopping, we see that they're using delivery options at most commonly at supercenters, supermarkets, health food stores, and small format grocers. So those small format grocers might include like Trader Joe's or another type of independent grocery store. Yet, even these heavier spenders of online food shopping are still reflecting a decrease in delivery options at farmers markets and direct markets. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. In terms of curbside pickup, it looked like they had a pretty even spread of curbside pickup usage rates at all of the retail channels that we looked at, which are these channels. And so this is looking at change from 2022 to 2023 across these food retail channels that we asked respondents about. And this is just the share of respondents that are shopping online at these channels in each year. So we see the biggest increase in usage rates at supercenters and supermarkets, as well as convenience and discount stores and independent restaurants. So those are the top three. And then for farmers markets and direct markets, we see this net just no change here going from 2022 to 2023. However, when we look at curbside versus delivery for all of these food outlets, and I know this is a lot of information here, but I'm just going to point out the main takeaways. So going back to this farmers markets finding, when we look at curbside versus delivery, we do still see this increase in online food shopping usage at curbside pickup from 3 to 4% going from 2022 to 2023, while we see a decrease in usage rates for delivery at these farmers markets and direct markets. And in fact, this decrease in delivery was the only category where we saw a decrease occur. And so that's really interesting, and it seems like it points to a discrepancy in the way that people are using online food shopping at these farmers markets and direct markets compared to other markets. And so I think I'm gonna go to the next slide and I might come back in just a second. But when we think about those who are shopping online at local and regional markets, it seems like we know this growth is being driven by curbside pickup, and it's likely to ensure that there is an availability of products of this limited inventory product at a farmer's market, rather than at other types of food retail outlets. Online shopping is likely being used more as like a time-saving tool and a convenience factor to be able to easily pick up groceries or have them delivered to your home. Whereas in a farmer's market, the consumer still has to go into the market to pick up their product. And so in that way, it seems like at farmers markets and direct markets, these are still being valued in terms of this curbside pickup here increase, but delivery options are not being used as much, which may also be a result of just a discontinuance of delivery options at these markets as we move beyond the pandemic, as this is likely a costly thing for farmers markets and direct markets to have to offer in the long run. General other trends that we see here before I go back to the local and regional online shoppers are that we see larger increases in online usage at these more national and larger retail outlets like supermarkets and supercenters, as well as convenience and discount stores. And we see that being true for both curbside and delivery. In particular, at convenience and discount outlets, we see this delivery increase is quite substantial compared to other markets, which is something to think about moving forward. And then another interesting takeaway is that independent restaurants, we see online usage continuing to increase substantially as consumers have gone back to these food away from home markets. Okay. And then thinking more about this online shoppers at local and regional markets, we see that around 46% reported that they did not use online in either year, 2022 or 2023. However, we see that 24% of respondents used online options at local markets in 2023 when they had not done so in 2022. So it seems like this may imply that we are still seeing people moving into the online shopping option space at these local and regional markets. And again, the majority of shoppers at local and regional markets reported using online options in one or both years survey. So that's a large portion of the local and regional shopper market. Okay.
And before we move on to the next discussion about food security, the other thing Mackenzie's exploring, but we haven't had time to look at it fully for today too, is the reason online might be interesting for local and regional food markets is something we saw, at least in the last survey, was if people are buying kind of more of their basic standard groceries through online and saving the time of not going to stores because they are using Amazon or Instacart, it looks like those same people who are using those online options are the ones going to the most different markets. So think about this concept is, so I can't get ketchup or paper towels at a farmer's market. So it's my decision today if I have time to shop, if I go to a store or a farmer's market. Well, if now all of a sudden you can have stuff delivered to your home that's not available at farmers markets because they can't be a full product line, it seems like it's releasing at least some segment. It looks like somewhere between 15 to 20% of consumers to go do this more fun shopping at farmers markets or butchers or bakeries or cheese shops, because they don't have to go to a one size fits all store that carries everything, because that can be delivered to their home. So it releases them to do what they'd consider shopping for more things where freshness and quality matter more, like baked goods, fruits and vegetables, meats, at more small artisan stores. So that really might be the storyline here for regional and local markets, is that online is releasing some of the time pressure people have to shop for their food and letting them spend more of not just their money, but their time at more specialty markets, which is going to bode well for local and regional markets, we think. So that's also why we've continued to explore online, is it's a big trend, but it also seems to be shaking up the markets in a few different ways, if that makes sense. And we can talk about that more after we finish presenting, but now we can go on to food security. I just wanted to not lose that storyline either, Mackenzie, because I know you've been working on it.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn. Yeah, thanks for that reminder. And yeah, it is very nuanced, and it's interesting to think about for sure, as people have different types of time budgets. And so part of our work is going to be looking at different subsets of the population and how they might be behaving in different ways related to their online food shopping at local markets. Okay, so moving forward, I'll just talk a little bit about what's going on with food security among our sample. And you might, because people were so aware of food insecurity issues during the pandemic, you might be surprised, or maybe not, but to learn that we are still seeing very high rates of food insecurity among our sample. So we asked respondents about their food insecurity status for the last 12 months, and we found that 38% of respondents found that the food that they purchased either often or sometimes didn't last, or they did not have enough money to get more. And we found that 30% ate less than they felt they should because there wasn't enough money for food. A similar rate, 27%, had someone in the household cut the size of their meal because there wasn't enough money for food. And around 22% reported being hungry at some point over the last 12 months because there wasn't enough money for food. And so these rates feel very high compared to some other rates that we've seen from other data sources, even that use the same exact questions that we used. However, when we compare these rates to what we have seen from previous iterations of our survey, they are around the same, or maybe just 1 or 2 percentage points higher. And so this trend in general, that we find that food security status has not changed much or has maybe increased a small amount, is in line with trends that are evident from other data sources. So this is a USDA Economic Research Service chart that shows food insecurity rates from their current population survey, which are where we based our food security questions from. And so we see that here at the end of the graph, we see this big increase, or this small increase in food insecurity rates after the pandemic. And at that time, we allocated a lot of our government budget for food assistance to help households who were experiencing losses in income and job losses, as well as disruptions to school meal programs and other types of food assistance, like food pantries that may have been experiencing obstacles with getting food to those in need. And so as some of that assistance tapered off, as well as, like Dawn mentioned, we had increased food price levels, we saw food insecurity rates start to increase again. And so given this context for what might be driving the food insecurity rates, we asked our respondents, among those who were food secure and food insecure, how many of them felt that they were spending a higher share of their budget on food compared to before the pandemic. And so for the food insecure populations, which are the blue and the red portion of the pie chart here, we see that around 26% of the whole sample were food insecure and spending a higher share of their budget on food than before the pandemic, compared to 12% of the whole sample were food insecure and did not feel that they were spending a higher share of their budget. And so the same sentiment that people are spending more on food seems to be felt by those who are food secure as well. And so this is going to be important as we seek to mitigate food insecurity with policy in the future. And then thinking about ways that households are acquiring food, so like what types of food assistance they might be using. We asked about gardening, food pantry usage, other food assistance programs like this could be like Meals on Wheels, as well as SNAP or food stamps, WIC, and school meal programs. And we here see the red is the food secure population in our sample, and the purple is the food insecure foods population. So among food insecure food populations, the SNAP EBT food assistance program, as well as food pantries, are the two ways that this population is acquiring food at the highest rates. And when we compare this to previous years, usage rates for both food pantry and SNAP have increased. So even though we are allocating less towards the SNAP EBT program than we were during the pandemic, the usage rate has continued to increase. And food pantry usage rates have increased substantially. So this is, again, probably an indicator that people have switched, have sought out other types of food assistance as this pandemic era assistance ran out. For WIC and the school meal program, it's important to note that a small percentage, I think Brittany said it was 25% of our sample had a child under age 18 at home. So that's why we see such comparatively lower rates of, basically I'm just trying to say that this doesn't reflect the eligibility. So not all food insecure populations are eligible for WIC and the school meal program, as they don't have children at home. So when we thought about the food insecure households who do have a child at home, around 20% are using the school meal program, which is still perhaps smaller than we may expect to see. And that usage rate for WIC was also small, although we are not able to completely discern eligibility from our sample. And there is some policy in the works to address this. So there's in 2024, the Biden administration is taking measures to modernize WIC. And so it will be interesting to see in the future if these usage rates increase. And I guess while I'm mentioning policy, during this time we saw that a new policy regarding SNAP was that you were able to use your SNAP benefits online for purchase at a broad variety of different retail outlets. So that may also be driving some of this increase in SNAP usage rates. Okay, and with that, I will turn it over to Courtney to look at factors driving consumers' food shopping behavior.
Hey everyone, my name is Courtney Cooper. I am a PhD student at the University of Arkansas. And as Mackenzie said, I'll be talking about some of the trends in factors driving consumers' food shopping behavior. Mackenzie, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So obviously, as we've been talking about so far in this presentation, a lot of the survey was focused on specific spending questions, but we also asked consumers about some of the motivations for what they shop and where they shop. The biggest and really least surprising result that came from this that you see here, the question, what are the top 3 most important factors in your food purchasing decisions? And you see each of them here as a percentage. And overall, this adds up to more than 100 because people could choose 3 of them. And we see that over 50% chose this core of affordability, healthiness, and widely available / convenient. And actually, 1/3 of consumers chose specifically those 3 in combination, which makes a lot of sense, especially as a lot of the things that Mackenzie just covered in the food insecurity section. And then Mackenzie, go ahead and go to the next one. So we also looked at that same data, but broken down into the rural, suburban, and urban settings to kind of see where those top 3 were falling for different groups. And sort of some of the trends that I think are the immediate things that jumped out to us were that organic was the highest in the urban group. And then we also saw that the healthy and convenient were almost tied with the rural groups. We see that convenient was a little bit lower in suburban and urban in terms of importance, but with rural groups, it was almost tied. And beyond those top 3 across all rural, suburban, and urban, supporting the local economy was the next option beyond those 3 that was very important to consumers. And next slide. So in addition to the motivations, we also asked a few questions to understand each consumer's what we called perceived consumer effectiveness, or how impactful they believe that their choices are in a variety of different scenarios that we have listed here. Some on impact on society, impact on the local economy, and then on their own personal health. Consumers were to answer these questions on a scale of 1 to 7, 7 being that they strongly agree with this, and 1 that they strongly disagree with this. The most overall, the strongest perceived consumer effectiveness was having a positive impact on their personal health at 5.69. And then next on the local economy, and then sort of the socially responsible being the least of those kind of core three that on their behavior. I think that one thing that I want to sort of for reference, that means that on like a 4.91 on being their impact on society means that 4/3, that was right in that neutral area, and just barely on the sort of slightly agree. The strongest of those being the substantial positive on personal health, but still in the somewhat agree, the slightly agree. And next. And then we then also broke those down on how we sort of wanted to look at those and how people would sort of perceive their impactfulness based on if they were sort of doing the majority of their shopping on loyal or on local markets versus non-loyal market or local markets. And we see that in both categories overall, the people who are local market users, that green bar right there, were viewing themselves, perceiving their impactfulness as significantly higher than their impactfulness of people who were non-loyal local users, which we're hoping to look both more to break down some of this effectiveness and see some of the spending patterns also. But I think that already it's showing us that there are definitely differences in the spending patterns based on people's perceived effectiveness of how their spending dollars can impact society, the local economy. And yeah, I think it's over to you, Dawn.
Yeah, and perceived consumer effectiveness might be a new concept to you all. It was to me. It was actually introduced to me by some peers in psychology, but it's when you think about people who decide they want to vote with their dollars, it's this idea that if you're voting with your dollars, do you believe it's actually moving the needle on any societal issues? Obviously, the personal health one's not surprising to see higher because you can actually track whether your personal health is getting better by checking your weight or your blood pressure or your blood work. These ones that are bigger and are you trying to do something big for society, like help keep farmers in business and be impactful on the economy? That's a little harder to believe, but that's why it's really impressive to see people who are shopping local seem to actually be seeing signals or having conversations with their farmers or their food systems, community organizations that make them believe that they are having that impact. So that's why we try to start tracking those for folks. And as you could guess, there's just a lot of diversity across responses, and we're showing you averages today, but we hope in future reports to actually have that broken down by some demographics, or like you see here, people are using local markets or are not. So with that, go to the next slide. We do want to wrap up because we know we just covered a ton of information in less than an hour. Good job by the team. But this is our assurance to you that a couple of things are going to happen in the next 24 hours, including we will post the slide deck with all those figures and charts for you to look at more closely. And this recording of this webinar with some of the color commentary to go with it, we'll post those up at this website in the next 24 hours. So, because a lot of people even signed up today couldn't come because this particular hour didn't work. So we'll post those. And in addition, over the next 6 weeks, we will have somewhere between 6 and 8 new consumer food insights posted, where we go a little more into detail on each of these one segments you saw today, that they'll be written by the folks you just heard present on them. And we might actually take some of the questions you asked today and dig a little deeper on some of that data before we do post those. But you know, hopefully this is useful to you all. We are happy to let you use these slides and figures and anything you're doing with your community groups, as long as you give attribution back to not any one of us individuals, but this website, because it's a project that AMS has invested a lot of resources in making sure is available for you. So we want to make sure they get attribution. But for now, then, I'm going to pop up a quick poll and we're going to go to questions and answers. I've done my best to, so we're just interested to see, given the findings we just shared with you, what was the most surprising or interesting thing to you? So people want to go ahead and take the poll. It should be popping up, but I've never done a poll before, so tell me if it's not working. Yeah, and so I have answered questions as best as I could, except for a couple I felt went a little deeper, including Julia's remark that yes, you can vote with your food dollars, but also vote with your votes. And that's always a good message. And then the two questions I have not been able to answer yet, and we can do it while the polls come in, is Mackenzie, someone asked about the inclusion of SNAP EBT that was targeted to households with children and how we feel like that's been captured in this data. And Jairus, you see the question here about the disaggregated data. You can talk about how we do that by location, and I can talk about it by channels. But why don't you start first, and then I'll let the poll kind of wrap up while you guys answer those.
Yeah, I can answer that question about pandemic EBT. The SNAP, yeah, so the reporting of their SNAP usage did include pandemic EBT. However, most of that pandemic EBT was discontinued by the time we were asking respondents about their food assistance usage. So we asked them in this survey about their usage in the fall of 2023 and 2022. And my understanding is a lot of that pandemic EBT was discontinued by the summer of 2022. But feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, you're seeing the poll response now. You all were interested or surprised in different things, so it's good news because then each of our consumer food insights will be interesting to some of you, we hope. But Jairus, do you want to start with a question on how we might be able to make available data to groups, and then I'll talk about how we'll do it by market channels?
So as far as breaking up responses by geography, there is a possibility for most of the regional food business center regions to do targeted analysis. So I think for most, I think there are enough responses, I think, in every region except for maybe the outer lying islands and whatnot. So we can break things up like that. We can also, I think there's another question about income and demographics. We can do all manner of things with that. I mean, one thing I would like to do is to look at expenditures by income level, and depending on your income, what kind of what proportion of your food dollars is spent in different market channels. And I think I only presented a few of the market channels we had that focused on local foods, but we did have we asked about convenience stores, discount grocery, super centers, meal kits, chain restaurants. I think those were the ones that I didn't include, but we have done things in the past with all of those market channels. And if you have an interesting question or thing to explore, let us know.
Yeah, thanks for handling both those questions. And yeah, there are about 5 of these consumer food insights already drafted that'll be coming out soon that include a lot of what you saw today, but almost all of them have at least 1 or 2 more charts or details because we had more writing space for those. So stay tuned for those, and there's at the same website we're posting this webinar at. But given a couple of the questions today, I think that will spur us maybe writing a couple more. So stay tuned. And then if you're sitting there in a month and you still don't see one that's interesting that you thought you asked about, we will do our best. But we're a mighty team, but we're small. And as you can see, there's just so much data here. To the question on local, we, for Courtney's questions, did not define local as is local important for you, but we classified people as local users by choosing some channels we felt represented local, which is farmers markets, community supported agriculture, and direct from producers. So in some cases, we define them by their use of markets, but in a couple places, we did not define local when we asked some of those value statements about local economy. So for some people, that might be their city. For some, as we know, there's state branding programs. We did not go into the weeds on that because that actually gets political, because some people feel like, the USDA right now calls local if you're supporting your state and its food products. So we didn't want to go against that, but we know for some people that probably means their 50-mile range of markets they can drive to. So that's where we might be a little weak on being able to make a lot of conclusions. Love to know all about low-income communities and where they shop. So we will definitely have at least one of our consumer food insights that will be differentiated. Well, we were going to do it by whether they were self-professed as food insecure. If people think it is important for us to actually disentangle not just a household telling us they feel like they're food insecure using the questions the USDA uses, but also making some income determinations, we certainly could do that as well amongst our team because they would perhaps complement each other. But you're right, we might get slightly different findings from that. Thanks for sharing that, Jairus. We also have an article. Yeah, we have not done as much with journal articles because the priority for AMS was for us to get these in bite-sized chunks that were more usable. But every young person you saw on this webinar today has a goal of making this part of their dissertation or thesis. So we're also trying to leave some of it so they can publish with it and make the start of their career with it. So stay tuned. We'll try to get more on the ground. But yeah, we've been slower to do that because we've been worried more about journal articles just take forever. Jairus and I will tell you sometimes we're sitting on those for 2 years. So we're trying to do these quick turnaround things to be responsive. And then we promise we'll get some of this out in journals as well. Well, so great questions, you guys. You can also come off mic. We don't have to be the only talkers here. Maybe we can stop sharing screen since I think everybody's got the links they need for this. But anything else people want to talk about? I tried my best to track the chat and be answering things, as did Samantha. But this is the time we can also make this a discussion too, because we're guessing all of you in here are doing work in this space and came to this because you really want to kind of understand what's going on better. And I think as Jairus showed you, we wish we could even tell you in a blanket statement, but there's a lot of diversity about how different parts of this country are also reacting to food expenditures. And like you all brought up, income levels, food security levels. We think the increase in food expenditures is very much being driven by upper middle class folks, but we haven't done that CFI yet. But that's also good news, I think, for some of you, because we have had pockets of this country get, approach, try to get livable wages and minimum wages on the books. And it seems to be playing out that those folks who are doing a little better with salaries and wages that are higher seem to be allocating some of that to buying better quality and fresher food. But we do still have those food insecure folks who it's a very opposite problem. And that's why we also love to see the USDA innovating things like the food procurement programs for food banks that were an innovation off of the farm to food box program. So this is hitting the country in all kinds of different ways and places that I don't think any of us can keep up with. So tell us what's going on in your neck of the woods so we make sure we do the right kind of publications that'll inform what you need to know. Yeah, Rita brought up an interesting question too, Jairus. No one else is talking, so Dawn will keep talking. Since pandemic EBT was slowed or stopped at different times for different states in the country, do you think geographically, now that you have these all geocoded, you could actually look at, like as an experiment, whether that had major impacts on the expenditures we saw happen in food markets? So if people are not aware of this, there's a very generous elevation of SNAP benefits during COVID because of the shock. And as Brittany showed in her slides, the number of people who were economically shocked by what was going on in the food system. And those actually persisted in some places. I don't know, some might even have it. We know Colorado best here because we're here, but they persisted through the spring of, I think, 23, if I remember right. But you're right, if those ended at different times in different parts of the country, it'd be interesting to see the impacts, both McKinsey on use of SNAP, of food pantries, and then Jairus and some of the other market channels, because SNAP, as we all know, SNAP got easier to use more places too. Supermarkets could even start using it, some supermarkets online. So if that's of interest to people, we can try to do something that particularly focuses on how some of those food security policies played out in markets as well, because we have the right time frame for that. Anyone else want to come offline and ask their question directly? Y'all don't want to listen to Dawn talk all day. Or we can end early too. That works. We probably filled everyone's brain up. There was a lot of data presented today.
Dawn, this is Rita Ordonez. I would be interested in seeing, that data breakout with the, the pandemic EBT and how it plays out geographically as things ended, and some states were able to continue. I know here in Washington State, we continued, and that had an impact not only, for the consumers, but also for the farmers markets. We saw a huge increase in our matching programs and dollars that were being used, through those programs. And then, the dollar amounts did drop for pandemic EBT. I think even in Washington at a certain point. And now we're moving to this Sunbucks, which is not considered EBT, I guess, but it really is, I guess. I don't know how to explain that exactly, because I'm not quite clear on how that's working, but that's starting up in this next year, this next season. So I would be interested in that data. I don't know if that's something that, you do have the ability to winnow out, but I think that geographic piece would be really interesting.
I think we are up to that challenge. If any of you who seem to in the chat box have expertise in this, if you can send us anything that's a summary of the timeline of states and how they sunsetted those, we will do our best. How's that? But we need your expertise to tell us where we get legitimate data about how the timing of those programs rolled out and ended. And then, obviously the other interesting thing here is we continue to have GusNIP and a really fervent program of that in some places across the country. And we haven't ever delved into that either, because that obviously opened the door for a lot more to be spent in direct markets than was true. So we're happy to try to take that on as a team, but any of you who could send us on this team links to the places we would find the information about the timing of those, that would help us out a lot. Thanks for that insight. Because we know there's going to continue to be and see even what's going on with WIC policies right now, we just know there's going to be a lot of dynamics in food assistance programs, and wherever we can find a way to motivate that those could be better formulated to make it that local and regional food markets can be a part of the solution is going to be great. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Rita. And again, we're happy to shut down earlier today. We put it as an hour and a half because we're always rushed to get through it in an hour. But great questions. You spurred a lot of good ideas for things we'll try to get out. Look for these to be posted again at the website that was shared with you. I think we have the ability to also send you guys follow-up emails to tell you when those are up, but we won't want to keep bothering you. So you will have to kind of peruse that website occasionally just to see as the consumer food insights are posted from 3.0, those will be over the next 6 weeks or so. And yeah, Casey and Rita, send us any information you have. I'll put my email in the chat box, and then we will end our recording for today and call it a good webinar. We were very excited to have so many of you join us. And again, for those of you who are watching this because you couldn't make it this hour and that we've sent it to after the fact, please feel free to reach out to our team if you have questions because you couldn't ask them in real time and you're watching the recording now. So thank you, everybody. And we will stay here in case there's any last remaining questions, but otherwise we'll stop the recording and we will end for today. And again, show our appreciation for you coming and appreciation of my team for doing such a good job presenting today.